Okay, I have an interesting reaction. It says there is an error that occurred, and on the other side, it's saying I'm live.
Yeah, I have
So,
live too.
yes, I have both the error and the live.
Oh,
So, which makes it interesting, and that makes me so okay. If you're seeing us live on LinkedIn, can one of you comment that you can see us? Because the idea is that we are live, and I'm presuming that. Okay, some technical challenges that can happen. So it's saying it's online. The event will start soon, is what it says. Okay. It's we are live. It says tick in the box. That's always a good start, at least not the straight way, but a little bit of round turn. So, hello and welcome everyone. For those of you who saw a bit of an error or something, that always happens. It's a good sign. It's also out of the way. It shows me that we are live. So, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you so much for liking, commenting before the event, and also now during the event, and afterwards spread the word because the recording will be available to you. And my name is Punit Bhatia. I'm a privacy and AI professional. So thank you so much for being here. And we have a very interesting lineup here. We are going to do is demystify EU AI Act. Yes, EU AI Act is here. It is with us, and we are going to demystify. So what do I mean by demystify? We will do two panels. Panel one, as you can see on the screen, we will talk about what is EU AI Act, or in fact, more importantly, why did we need it, and how do we manage, or how does it make an impact for society and human mankind? Plus, how can you as a company comply with it? That will be the panel one. Then we'll go into the panel two, wherein we'll talk about risk management. What is the risk management approach in EUAI Act? Broadly speaking, 40 to 45 minutes for each panel, give and take, and we'll be done in about an hour and a half. To make it interesting, make it interactive, ask your questions, and we will make sure your questions come in here. So let's start with the panel one. Welcome, colleagues. Who I have with me is if you are in the field of privacy and security, you would have heard something called privacy by design or security by design. Now, if you were ever wondering who is this and who created it, must be a very intelligent man or woman. It's a woman, and she's called Dr. Ann Cavoukian, and we have the privilege of having her with us. So, welcome, Ann.
you're very kind. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you so much. And then, if you've been in Italy and you've seen all the provinces and have been thinking, how does it work? Do they have data protection authority everywhere, or is it one, or so on? I can tell you there are many data protection authorities in Italy, and one of them is in San Marino. Of course, I don't go into the republical or federal structure of Italy, so no remarks there. But what we have with us is Nicola Fabiano, who's ex-president of the Data Protection Authority of San Marino. So welcome, Nicola.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Punit. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. My pleasure.
And then, if you are in the field of education and you ever wanted to do a degree or an MS or an engineering, you would have heard about Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And you would have said, oh, wow, that's a great place. And there are great people teaching there. And one of them happens to be Raghu Bala. So he's with us and he takes care of the AI business implications or AI implications for business. That course, and I did it with him, and I was really impressed with his skills and caliber, and I'm happy to have him as well.
Thank you for inviting me to this panel and happy to share the stage with all the other really accomplished individuals on the panel and looking forward to participating in this event.
So let's get started. Thank you so much, each one of you, for being here, and each one of you who will come in the next panel. So let's start with the first basic question. We've been talking about AI for long, but recently there has been a lot of buzz saying AI will kill us, AI will do this, AI will do that, and we need a regulation. That was the philosophy, and there was no regulation. And then the EU AI Act came. But I want to understand from each one of you, maybe starting in the alphabetical order, why did we need this EU AI Act over and above what media has been telling us? What was the need for this act? What has changed? Because some say AI has been there for years, ever. Everything is, but some say something. But I see Anne is already shaking her head. So, Anne, enlighten us.
AI has been around for years, but not the generative AI that was advanced last year or the year before by ChatGPT. This just grew it dramatically, and it has expanded its use so widely. And this is the concern that people in privacy and security have, because what a lot of this AI does is it goes to hundreds, thousands of websites, databases, etc., and just extracts all the information contained, including personally identifiable data. So it doesn't just extract information about what I'm doing or who I'm with or things of that nature. It identifies that it's Ann Cavoukian engaged in all these activities. And that is just such an egregious transgression of privacy. Privacy is all about control, personal control relating to the use and disclosure of your personally identifiable data. And in this context, generative AI, the way it's taking place now, has just left privacy far behind. So I think what we're trying to do is play catch up. I think that's what you're seeing with the EU, the AI Act, and now the US is mirroring that, working with the EU, and it's beginning to grow dramatically. And thank God, because we're already behind the gate. We're lagging behind. AI of this nature is manifesting itself everywhere, and people love it because it facilitates so many activities and actions, etc., makes life easier for a lot of people. But you end up relinquishing all control in terms of your personal information, your identity, and that is completely unacceptable. So as I've always said, you have to look under the hood. We have to look at how can we apply privacy by design, which is all about being proactive in an effort to prevent the privacy and security harms from arising. So that's what I'm looking at.
Okay. And Nicola, your view on the same thing. Why did we need this EU AI Act?
Well, it's challenging to discuss relevant topics in a short time, but I try to describe my point of view. Yes, I think that I agree with the comments from Anna, and I want to explain my point of view in three short points, three pros and three cons. The first one, pros, is that AI represents a highly complex phenomenon with exponential growth and expansion, transversally involving several areas with significant impacts, and mainly is not a recent innovation. Probably I will explain later what I mean. The second point is that AI needs a multidisciplinary approach with professionals from different sectors. And the third pros is regulating the use of AI systems, not AI, is a good thing to guarantee each individual's fundamental rights. Moving to the three main cons and criticalities, the first one I think is over legislation. The AI Act stems from the European Digital Strategy, which includes the artificial intelligence strategy. Europe has published over 100 acts in the digital sphere, but the risk of over legislation is to generate disorientation. The second point, the second cons, is wrong competitiveness. With the AI Act, Europe wanted to further demonstrate its digital sovereignty, but this is a short-sighted vision because it does not take into account what is happening in the rest of the world. I am referring to the United States, China, India, etc., for researchers and business. With the AI Act, Europe wanted to show the world that it was a leader in adopting AI legislation. The third cons is warnings. Eminent scientists working on AI for years, I am referring to Stuart Russell, Peter Norvig, Max Tegmark, and others, highlighted the warnings about the considerable risks arising from the distorted use of AI systems, even described as autonomous weapon systems. On that point, the EU oversight model do not consider other equally interesting as described in some research.
Okay. And Raghu, what would be your view on why do we need this EU AI regulation or AI regulation in general also?
Sure. So basically, I'll just go quickly. So building upon what Anne said, okay, now AI itself, you should split into two parts: discriminative AI and generative AI. Discriminative AI, the answers are very determinate. In generative AI, the answers are indeterminate. So you don't know what the next token is going to give you. So now what happens is, now once you have indeterminate answers, now comes into play social, moral, and ethical implications. So you need to have some guardrails in order to control what AI is going to do next, because you cannot predict what it's going to do. So, if, for example, if you go into ChatGPT and you give the same prompt twice, you'll get two different answers because it's not discriminate. It's not determinate. It can be, it can give you a different answer each time. So now with that, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. So you need to figure out how to put some constraints around this problem, and that's why governments all over the world are starting to feel like, okay, now what was kind of can be controlled is now sort of like not controllable. So we got to put some regulations around it so that it doesn't get out of hand. That's what's prompting the EU to act. And one other point is, data is the fuel for AI. Okay, that's known. But the data itself can be very biased. So, for example, I was in Africa a couple of months ago at a conference as a keynote speaker. And the problem is the data and the LLM models and so on, they are trained on Western data. It's got nothing to do with Africa. It's got no relevance to the people there or their culture or anything like that. So now what happens is data can get very biased and so on. So again, the need for regulation is to protect the people who are going to be subject to AI from any sort of prejudice and bias and those types of things as well. So that's a number of reasons why the EU has acted, and I think it's quite good. At least someone is beginning to put some framework around this thing, and I think it's a positive move. But like what Nicola said, you cannot get too far into it such that you start to prevent technology from progressing by putting so many rigid rules that it cannot breathe. So you got to have a kind of a balance in this.
I agree with you. A balance is needed because typically we say technology leads and laws lag, because technology gives us new things which we need to control, which we need to regulate, and then we create laws. And by the time we create a law, the technology has already moved forward. So it's always a catch up that we are playing. But again, AI needs to be good. AI needs to be good for the society and mankind. And that's why we have to give it some direction, give it some shape. So, talking about that, what is this EU AI Act about? Because we all know it's a risk based approach, which we will delve into in the second panel. But what is it, this EU AI Act all about? Because give us a perspective, a short one, and then we will see.
Sure. If you want me to start, if you look at the way the EU acts, generally speaking, you look at the GDPR that was passed and things of that nature, personal control, retaining a sense of control over the use and disclosure of your personal data is critical. So the AI Act, they're trying to preserve that we need to preserve some sense of control over who gains access to our personally identifiable data without having sought our consent or anything of that nature. So it's trying to prevent the automatic extraction of all information in databases around the world, uh, without any notion of personal control or consent or any of that. So it's trying to regain some kind of balance like that, because it's been totally lost with AI, and now we're trying to get it back. So I think that's one of the major goals of the AI Act, is trying to understand that you can't just go and extract whatever information you want from whatever databases for purposes of AI. That's not acceptable.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And I think it's the same thing what GDPR did, trying to bring control to the user. It's the same way in AI, we want to put the user in control of and being able to be aware of what's happening, because you don't want a mission impossible scenario that a robot takes over the world. And of course, that can virtually happen, but we want to avoid that insofar possible. So maybe this time I ask Raghu first. Raghu, what's your view on what is this EU AI Act all about?
So what happens is, there are two major prongs, and I won't take the thunder away from the second panel, but the first prong is a risk-based approach, right? So that second panel can talk, and so they classify risk into high risk, no, unacceptable risk, high risk, medium risk, and then like no or low risk. Okay, that's the framework. The second thing that they're worried about is transparency. So let me talk about that a little bit more. So transparency, one of the problems is once machines or automatons are controlling, actions, you want to know why they arrived at a particular action. So that's AI observability, or this transparency that we're talking about. Now, once the thing that Anne is talking about, which is very important, which is once the machines are sort of like, you're worried about they're getting out of control. How do you control? The word control means if you know why it arrived at a decision, that transparency, once you can figure out how it arrived at a decision, that's the control choke point that you have to hold on to. Once it's not transparent, you don't know how it arrived at actions. And this is what Elon Musk is always worried about. He keeps saying that, machines are, might take over because you cannot figure out what they did. Once you cannot figure out what they did, then you are in trouble. So I think regulation has to control this part, because once you know it's transparent and observable, then it's within sort of like a framework that we can, as humans, figure out what happened, and that's very important for AI.
That's very true. I think explainability, that means being able to explain what is done in a transparent and a simple language which user can understand, and at the right moment, prompting it at the right time, because you don't say I'm installing Alexa and it keeps asking me for one day all the prompts to say agree, 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 agree. That doesn't work. You need to ask the right prompt at the right time and being able to explain this is what it means for me. But Nicola, so what is your view? Because you're also working with the lawmakers in the EU.
Yeah.
What is this EU regulation all about? What's the objective behind it?
Anne and Raghu already said something about. I don't want to sound very critical today, but I would like to stress some points related to when the AI Act doesn't apply, and because there are some concerns related to the exemptions, particularly military. AI system development began for operational activities in the military, and the concerns are the risks of the development of use of dangerous AI systems and their possible availability to civil society where they may be misused. Uh, what about the government competence? Regarding the military sphere, the regulation falls within the competence of governments. This point raises a great question. How much can governments maintain accountable behavior and pay attention to those concerns without rules and guarantees for the individuals? This is another point. This is a $1 billion question. The third point is police and judicial cooperation. On this point, one cannot overlook the doubts about the impact of AI, of high-risk AI systems on individuals. Two main questions. What about in case of urgency? What guarantees are there for individuals' fundamental rights and freedoms in case, for example, of biases with no rules, especially on human oversight and consequent possible errors. The fourth point is scientific research and development purposes and research testing or development activities. So that exemption may be a balanced solution that aims to provide some guarantees, but might reduce and limit research activities. Three questions. Will researchers and scientists be available to work only to reach scientific results and acquire data on projects that will never be put into production? Does that make sense? Who will control them? I mean, project and researchers in that case. So some few points when in the cases of the AI Act doesn't apply.
Makes sense. And I think this is the right moment. Somebody has asked a very good question in the chat saying, do lawmakers and regulators have sufficient technical expertise and even understanding the craft of effective lawmaking and comprehensive lawmaking, especially as AI is a rapidly changing and complex field? Well, that is not only a challenge for lawmakers, but also for us. But Anne,
Of course not. I mean, the lawmakers and regulators have a broad understanding of what is important and what must be preserved in terms of rights and not relinquished. But then, of course, you have to work with the brilliant tech community to engage them to apply this in any kind of real sense. You know, I always say you have to look under the hood in terms of whatever the technology is involved. You have to ensure that the technical staff that you have an understanding of what you're trying to achieve in terms of your goals of preserving privacy, preserving security, but not standing in the way of advancing the interests of AI in non-personally identifiable data. You know, privacy by design is all about, it's not zero sum, privacy versus whatever. It's privacy and whatever the business interest is, privacy and security. It's and you need to have that. So when I work with technical people to convey this, I start there and I say, I'm not trying to get rid of this. I want to make sure it works in a way that respects privacy and preserves personally identifiable data, etc. And when you can explain it to them, they can figure out how to do it. I mean, I'm not saying it's an easy task with AI, but this is doable. But you definitely need technical, brilliant staff.
I think that's a very well-rounded answer, but I like to give a completely different spin. In a company, we have a CEO. He does not know each and every department. Maybe he's a specialist from HR, from risk, from compliance, from sales, from operations, from business, but he does not know each and every business, and you cannot expect them to be expert in privacy, AI, and so on. Same way, the lawmakers or the governments are not expected to be an expert on each and everything. And as Anne emphasized, it's the role of the government to make laws while going to the technical experts and reach out to the community of technical experts. And that's how the laws are framed. And yes, at certain times in some countries, there may be some things which we will say this is not okay and that is not okay. But that's part and parcel of the game, because that's what we say sometimes about our CEOs also. So let's not get that far ahead. I don't see any more question there, but so we can maybe get to the other part of the thing is that is around how does this EU AI Act help the society? Because what we're talking about is it's for the society. We want to manage the social, moral, and ethical aspects of AI. So how does a regulation like EU AI Act help us in achieving that? And maybe if this time, if it's okay, I start you with Nicola, if it's okay.
Okay. The AI Act helps the internal market and probably our society according to the subject matter in Article 1. However, we must be positive and consider that there will be guarantees for individuals due to the human-centric approach. The AI Act explains that it is a general framework and does not provide management system solutions, so we should refer to some international standards like ISO IEC 41000 and others. But I want to stress a point, a relevant point, which is the liability. The AI Act doesn't regulate liability depending on AI systems. Liability depends, of course, on the legal systems and thus for Europe, on a regulatory source governing liability arising from artificial intelligence and for each member state or national legislation. The European Commission published two proposals on September 28, 2022, notably a proposal for a directive on liability for defective products and the second proposal for a directive on adapting the rules on non-contractual civil liability to artificial intelligence. On this point, European Data Protection Supervisor expressed its view in Opinion 42/2023, which included some suggestions. So there might be some criticalities related to the transposition stage due to the national legislator will have to consider the domestic legal framework, and so the introduction of an AI system liability at national level could conflict with the existing domestic legal framework. This is my perspective.
That's interesting. And I'd like to move to Raghu, if it's okay.
Sure. So one of the things that I teach in the course, actually, I share this video that I post in the course. It's about a robot, and the robot is actually given a problem, and the problem is it's like in a self-driving car scenario, and you have two choices to make. You can get into an accident where you can hurt the passengers in the car, or you can hit a pedestrian and injure or kill the pedestrian. Now, this is a dilemma for the robot, okay, because it doesn't know which one do I go. One way, I'll hurt the passengers. The other way, I would hurt someone outside the car. So these are types of things where, why I'm mentioning this, there's no real correct answer to this, but why I'm mentioning this example is because once AI is actually being introduced into the public domain, self-driving cars, self-driving trucks already running in North America, and the public is involved, and they might get into like accidents or claims or insurance or litigation or whatnot, but they need to understand how these systems operate, and I think the more knowledge is spread among the society about how these systems engage, that's very, very important. Another thing that, on the how part of it, which I am a proponent of, I don't know if many people are, but a lot of AI systems are still very centralized in the sense that big companies are controlling these AI engines, the data that govern these AI engines. One of the things I propose is that we use blockchain a little bit more, because blockchain is transparent, it's outside of, it's decentralized, and this would improve the transparency quotient of these systems so that anyone can inspect the data and so on, especially if it's for the public good. The public needs to be able to see that data if they so desire. Right now, what happens is a lot of it is behind the curtains of large companies which control these systems, and no one knows what has gone into the data to make them act a particular way. So that part of it, I think, soon there'll be some sort of understanding of how the systems work, and legislation should try to at least bring about that transparency, and blockchain is a very good mechanism to make that happen.
Sure. And how do you think this EU Act is helping the society at large?
I think it's providing some comfort in the sense that certainly people I've spoken to all around the world, including the EU, of course, are getting very nervous about AI. They're getting nervous about what's happening to their personal information. Where does it reside? There are data brokers everywhere. There's all kinds of information out there that is available to AI in terms of being extracted, etc. And so people are very concerned these days with their information. The EU AI Act will give them some level of comfort that the government is trying to do something to protect your data, while enabling AI to take place, because AI will bring multiple gains as well. So I think it's very positive in that sense. Transparency is important, what's taking place, trust, which has been lacking for quite a while, will hopefully be restored somewhat. And it's just baby steps at this point, but I think it will give certainly the public a greater level of comfort than they had before.
I can agree with you. It's a step that will create comfort. And there, sometimes people ask, and someone has already asked in context of the bias, because what happens is data that is being fed to the models is usually biased or it's not 100% okay. Now, even if we say we will clean data and it will still be biased because it's dependent on the person cleaning the data, and that the person also has inherent or subconscious bias. So, how can we reach in AI systems something called the person is asking 100%, but I would say reasonable bias and fairness. Anyone wants to take that?
I can give a shot. So can you just repeat the question one more time quickly?
Basically, person is saying, how do we reach a state wherein the data is not biased and we remove dependence on people?
Yeah. So first of all, you need to know which is the demographic you're using the data for. Okay. So it has to reflect the demographic it's used, the context and demographic it's used for. So if I'm going to subject AI to some audience in North America, then it has to reflect that particular populace. So if I'm going to put it in some part of Asia or whatnot, it has to reflect that. That's number one, in my opinion. That would remove the sort of like bias of the underlying data. Now, in terms of transparency itself, I mentioned, I think data is currently being collected and not sometimes not cleansed in any way, and also hidden behind closed doors of companies. That if you put it out in blockchain and so on, and for public inspectability, that's one thing. One thing about what Anne mentioned earlier, PII information, personally identifiable information, needs to be somewhat what they call it. There's a word for it. It skips me right now, but basically you hide that part of it. Okay, you don't need to show that part. You can put pseudonyms or block that part of it. Don't need to know who it came from, but that would at least protect the privacy, but still making the data valuable for learning, so that future generations or whatnot can leverage the data to make decisions, which is what we all want to get to. But I think there are mechanisms in place. It's just that getting all the players who are collecting this data, which happens to be all the big name brand companies you all know what run platforms for e-commerce, for search, for other things, that they need to come to a table to play. Right now, they are using data as their way of making money, and that needs to maybe stop. And that's, I think, one of the questions on the panel that I see is about AI and Web3. So Web3 is all about sharing. It's not about hoarding. And right now we are in the hoarding mode among the large companies. So if we can move the needle towards sharing, and then you can get to the transparency and removal of bias and all those types of things.
Thanks, Raghu. And it seems you want to add something.
My only concern with the notion of sharing, which I am very fond of, is again, you have to share in the context of non-personally identifiable data.
Yeah.
Then you are free to do whatever you want with the data. That's why I always say privacy and data utility go hand in hand, as long as you remove the personal identifiers. So then I'm all for it. And I work with many companies to enable that to happen, to make sure they can benefit from their data in a variety of ways without risking the privacy of their customers or subjects or whoever's involved.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And there's another question in the context of how can we have consistent and harmonized laws that are applied across jurisdictions to avoid a patchwork of regulations or vacuum of legal frameworks when it comes to technologies operating on global scale. Now that goes similar to what we had in the GDPR. The GDPR came in and now we have 100 plus law countries replicating it. In a way, it's a consistent standard being replicated, but in another way, everyone wants to be different, so they change the 20% of it, name it differently and all that, and create that variety of, or spaghetti of laws, as we call it. Anyone wants to take that?
Yes, everybody knows that the AI Act will be a regulation in Europe, so it will apply in all 27 member states, European member states. But if we discuss about a global, a global legislation, I want to highlight that the UN group of experts published an interim report about the governance, the AI governance at the global level. And they considered that the AI Act and President Biden's executive order on AI are both governance models, and they hope for the fulfillment of a worldwide one. From my perspective, I remain deeply skeptical of the feasibility of a worldwide AI governance model, primarily due to the formidable challenge presented by each country's steadfast desire for its own AI sovereignty and the potentially disruptive effects of divergent regulations. And from my perspective, the equation representing global governance as impossible is many laws and fewer opportunities.
Actually, I'll just add one more thing. It's kind of funny. Larry Ellison from Oracle, actually, he brought up something a couple of weeks ago as a news release. And he talked about, there's, in GDPR, there's something called data residency, right? Every country needs to maintain its own data and so on. And the EU, it's considered one big block. So as long as your data centers within the EU, it's okay. Like Facebook got fined, I think, quite a lot of money, a few $billion, for shipping data back to US from EU without data residency within US, within EU. Now, the thing that Larry brought up was that in the future, because AI is so important to, like what Nicola mentioned about military and sovereignty and security of a country and things like that, he talked about actually each country trying to maintain the data centers within their own country, so that the AI is not going to bleed into even within EU. It might be within separate countries, so it's not going to bleed outside of your region. So that's going to be very important, and I think that poses in the business context, there's a lot of opportunity as well, but you have to maintain your data within your own boundaries and things like that. That's going to be very big. Because once it starts bleeding, then you lose control of it. So that's going to be a big theme going forward.
I think data sovereignty is an interesting topic, and maybe Anne, you would have a view on that because you're talking to a lot of regulators and governments.
Data sovereignty is very important. There's no question. But regardless of where you are, whatever jurisdiction you're in, the notion of privacy and data protection is very simple. And to me, doesn't relate to sovereignty at all. Relates to data subjects, their personally identifiable information, whether they can retain personal control. Privacy is all about control relating to the use and disclosure of your personal information. So that's the way I view it, as opposed to sovereignty. And, when the EU comes out with legislation like the GDPR and now the EU AI Act, other countries try to, if not mirror it, certainly work with it, match it. I know the US is working on an AI Act and all that. So I think that's very important. But the notion of sovereignty to me is far more related to individuals' personal control than anything else.
I think sovereignty for me can be interpreted in many ways. Like, one is the data sovereignty in itself, the data confidentiality, integrity, and availability is maintained. Second is the sovereignty in terms of the individual. What does he want to do? Does he have control over it or not? Then it's the state or the country or the jurisdiction. What control do they have? And then, of course, physically, where does the data reside? So it's a very complex and complicated topic, and AI doesn't help in that.
But Punit, if I can add, it doesn't have to be that complicated. I don't disagree with you with all the layers you identified. But whenever I talk to governments, I was privacy commissioner here for 3 terms, and what I say to them is it's all about the individual's personal information and their ability to retain control over
Mhm.
its use and disclosure. That's at the heart of it. Then you can add all kinds of layers of different things and laws in various countries and how they work together. But in my view, that has to be at the heart of it.
Okay. And that is completely agreeable, because if you put that in right order, the individual in the control, rest of it can be taken care. And
Yes,
now I understand why you think that, simply because
thank
you are putting the person in charge, and then if person is in wherever, the country is taken care of.
yes, thank you.
And no, but it's always exciting talking to you and how you simplify things. And then there's another question which we've always been talking about: responsible AI and trustworthy AI, and taking ethics also into consideration. I know, and you're working on ethics by design nowadays. So I ask you, or trust by design as you call it sometimes. So what's your take on this, on the responsible AI, trustworthy AI, and ethics into AI?
I don't want to take over. I want to make sure the gentlemen also have an opportunity to speak. So I'll keep my answer really short. And then once again, it relates to ethics by design, privacy by design, security by design. It's all about the individual retaining control and having an understanding of how their data is going to be used. When you think of ethics by design, it's all about how is my data being used, by whom, and for what purposes. Transparency is very, very important for people to have an understanding of how their data will be used, and then they can make decisions relating to their desire to consent to that or not.
Makes sense. Raghu or
Yeah.
Nicola, you want to add something to that?
So I'd
Uh,
say this.
uh,
Yeah, go
Please,
ahead. Go ahead.
please,
Yeah,
go
so I'd
ahead.
say in terms of AI itself, I mean, these regulations have to be somewhat malleable. I'll tell you why. Because AI is not static, right? AI is by definition machine learning. That means it learns and it morphs and it changes. So whatever laws that are passed have to be within, have to understand that you are talking about not like other technologies which are pretty static. Once it's carved in stone, it's like that. Here it's going to change. Okay. And so what happens is, if we talk about responsible AI, trustworthy AI, let's say that the first iteration of some system, let's say talking about self-driving cars or whatever, just an example, it might perform a particular way, and there might be some accidents, there might be some issues. Now what has to happen is the laws have to allow for the system to sort of learn from its mistakes and improve itself. And that way what happens is, over time, the trust between the AI and the human population, society, and so on will start to grow, because it'll be a feedback loop that is continuously happening. And that's very, very important for AI, because unlike a lot of other technologies which don't change so often, this almost changes with data, almost changes in real time. And so I would say that we cannot be so critical of AI from the get go. We have to give it a little bit of rope in order for it to learn and improve itself as well.
That makes sense. And Nicola, you wanted to add also?
Yes, briefly, I agree with Raghu and Ann, and I want to add only that AI is an umbrella, and we should talk about AI systems, because the AI Act regulates AI systems. We do not confuse AI with AI systems. This is the first point. The second point is that ethics is a very critical point. In a recent paper I published on LLMs, highlighted that the need of consider also, apart from the human oversight, the ethical oversight, because if we consider the processes of that an AI systems does, we cannot ignore the approach, the ethical oversight approach. And on this point, I think that it could be opportune to make evaluation to ensure so ethical oversights and mitigation regarding protected categories, intersectionalities, and vulnerable populations.
That makes sense. Now, in essence of time, I wanted to normally ask you two things. How can companies comply with it? One thing for them to do, and also your one final message. But if I ask that, we will be running over time. So, what I will ask you is to combine the two and say, what would be your one final message towards organizations who want to comply with it? How, I mean, of course, it's a long process, but in your view, what would be, or how would be the starting towards the journey on compliance towards AI regulation, not only EU Act and maybe a bit more broader.
The one message I would like to get across is to law enforcement, because people think that the police can just go in and extract whatever information they want when they have a case or not. No, what I always say to the police and to others is, if you have solid grounds for gaining access to someone's personal information, you go to court, get a warrant. If you have a warrant, that is your legal means by which to gain access to personally identifiable data. Short of a warrant, you don't have any greater right than anyone else to gain the public's right of access to people's personal information. So I think that's critical. The other issues, transparency. Companies, organizations have to be very clear what they're doing with your personal information, especially in the context of AI, and who else may be gaining access to that information without your knowledge or consent. That should not be permitted, and I would seek ways to have that imposed.
So putting people in control of things. And may I go to Nicola and ask what would be your message?
Briefly, I suggest to consider training courses for everyone involved in the company's AI processes, and also I suggest to evaluate assessing AI risk, AI system, and another point is to consider the data used by an AI system and whether they meet the quality criteria and if they are accurate. Last, I think that it's necessary to act soon and not wasting time to wait the application, the concrete application of the AI Act, because we are experienced with the GDPR. The AI Act, the first application is 6 months. So we are ready, and this is my suggestions.
Thank you. For definitely start now, don't wait. And Raghu.
Yeah, so just briefly, I'd say that the way the act has been constructed, it requires one to assess the applications according to risk criteria. So I believe that the same companies who are doing GDPR and SOC 2 compliance and so on will start to add EU Act AI compliance among the list of compliance activities that they do, these assessment companies and so on. So whoever's in enterprise, when they want to launch an application, they might want to put an extra step in the launch process to say that, okay, we finished coding, we finished testing, but let's now go for compliance testing to make sure that in which category that our app sort of like fits within. They might want to do it at the tail end as well as at the beginning. At the beginning, they want to make sure that they're not going to build an application which is in the unacceptable risk criteria, because it won't pass that EU AI Act compliance anyway. So you want to figure out where you sit within those 4 categories and then plan accordingly or whatever IT project and then launch it, so that you launch something which is going to meet the standards that have been imposed by the EU.
That's very well said. I think you're saying compliance by design or risk by design. So, okay. So, if we were to wrap up in few words, I would say you have said that in view of the generative AI and the discriminative AI that's coming up, and the challenges it poses to society, morals, and ethics, we do need an EU AI Act or an act or a regulation. And it does not solve all challenges. So the challenges around liability, copyright, IP, all those will remain. There will be other laws. So everything works in conjunction. And in view of the privacy of individuals, it's very important to put people in control of their data. So we are in a way extending what was the basis or the fundamental of the privacy laws or the GDPR into AI Act and making it more realistic in context of the systems, because now the systems are, some of the systems are going to be autonomous and they're going to generate data and create more challenges for us. That's what we are saying. And we are also saying, do not wait to act, start now, and
Yes.
start as you started with your privacy or GDPR. Start reading, understanding the law, converting it into a policy, then governance, and then step by step maintaining a log of your systems. And that's where all of us are here to help you. And I would, with that, say thank you so much, Anne, Nicola, Raghu, for your wonderful insights. And we will then move into the second part, that is how the risk management approach. So I will switch the panelists. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.
Thank you.
So that was our panelists on the perspective of what, why, and how around the risk manage EU AI Act. And now we get into the second part, and I welcome to the stage first our moderator Saurabh Gupta, who's a dear friend and also a serial entrepreneur. He's been active in the space of creating technology or Salesforce-based technology for compliance with privacy, security, and AI legislations. And he's very, very active. So welcome, Saurabh.
Thank you so much for having me, Punit. It's a pleasure to be here.
And it's a pleasure to have you. And we are also going to have somebody who's been working with the governments and also in the government and in the Information Commissioner's Office of Jersey, called Caro Robson. So welcome, Caro. Very happy to have you.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
And then, as we are talking about how can we miss somebody with a vast expertise on risk and who has been a risk professional for, I think, decades now, and has advised, worked in companies to set up risk frameworks. Because if we talk about EU AI Act, we also want to understand how does the act flow and how do our current risk management practices allow us to leverage them. We have Alessandro Mauro. Welcome, Alessandro.
Thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure and an honor to take part to this interesting conversation.
Thank you so much. And now I hand over to my dear friend Saurabh so that now I can switch to panel and I can also talk a bit.
Thank you so much, Puneet, and nice to see you again, Alessandro and Caro. Thanks everyone who's joining us today. The thing that's really interesting is you have a panel with extremely diverse experience, and you have people, all of who are needed for these things to become real. You have folks who represent the governance point of view, the ICO office's perspective, and some of those areas from a policy making perspective. You have folks who are doing risk management for a living and who want to look at it from a risk perspective of how large and mid-sized businesses can address some of these things and make sure that they're compliant while also balancing business imperatives. And then, of course, you have Puneet, who's one of the facilitators, authors, thinkers in this space and spent a lot of time in data privacy and now AI. And finally, I come from a very implementation part of the world. I'm one of those people who gets handed down these things of like, go make this happen. And so you will see a juxtaposition of how you see these new laws come into place. What's the kind of churn around it that mentally happens with a variety of different perspectives. And so I'm looking forward to how we move forward. So before we can start, Punit, do you want to give us a really quick recap from your session one? I attended a part of it, but I think it may be useful to set the stage for our folks. And then anybody who's interested, I'm sure it's gotten recorded and you can get a copy.
Sure. So we talked about in the session one, we didn't go deep into EI Act, but we got into why did we need the EU AI Act. And one of the things we talked about is AI is not like any other systems, because we often say systems and automation was there for long and AI is just an extension of it. No, it's not just an extension. When we talk about generative or what we call the discriminative AI, the challenge is enormous and it creates a lot of social, moral, ethical, political, job levels, and many levels of challenge. And to address that, a law was needed. And there we have this law, the EUI Act, which does not impose all the requirements into all the systems, but says, let's take a risk based approach, that is, grade systems into risks. So we will prohibit certain systems, and for most systems, there will be no requirements. And for the remaining systems, there will be transparency obligations if they are in the limited risk. And if they are in the high risk category, all the requirements around explainability, the data quality management, data governance, and a whole lot of requirements that are being talked about EOA Act, then they apply. So it's not holistic application saying take it or leave it. It's a risk-based approach, and that's where our panel comes in. And another thing we talked about is it's not be and we have and it's the be all end all solution. It is going to be allowing you to do the risk management or AI related requirements on AI systems. But in terms of the copyright infringement, liability infringements, or even the IP infringements, the other laws will also need to be upgraded, because we all know if Palmolive or Unilever builds a product, there are a lot of checks, a lot of laws that apply on those products. So similar, we need to think of in the software world, how do we manage that? And last but not the least, we also discussed that if you're thinking of the EUI Act compliance, the time is now. Don't think it's 2 years or 6 months and you can start. We all have the lessons from GDPR. We thought there are 2 years, and then in the last mile, we learned it's not enough and we're still working on it. So that's in brief. Of course, if people are interested in understanding the EUI Act, there are a lot of information available on our website and they can take advantage of that.
That's a great recap. Thank you, Puneet. So, with that, I'll ask a question from Caro. Caro, I know you come from an incredibly diverse background and a lot of seasoned point of view on some of these laws and regulations. So, when you think about the EU AI Act, can you talk a little bit about what it means to businesses, and also maybe get a little more detail into what Puneet was mentioning around the risk-based approach?
Certainly, yes. So it's at the moment it's a 459-page tome that businesses are sort of staring at and looking at and wondering what on earth this thing is. So let's get into some of the context and kind of take a step back and then a little bit of a deep dive, I think, in some of the definitions, because I think that's where the real meat of this is, and it's not always obvious from reading hundreds of pages of this legislation. So at a high level, it is EU legislation that is both product safety legislation, which is kind of a different approach to the other thing it's doing, which is fundamental rights legislation, and it's free market legislation. So you have this kind of dual approach of protecting rights, but also taking a product safety approach. And there'll be a lot of technical regulations coming under the regulation itself, the Act itself, that go into more detail because it's product safety. And it's protecting people in the EU from harms. And the harms that are being protected from are really vast: economic, social, physical, psychological, environmental, and also harms to fundamental rights. That's kind of important because that informs the understanding of risk that the Act takes. And it can be quite different to some other definitions of risk in, say, financial services legislation, or to the business risks around AI that we're going to talk about in a moment. So the risk-based approach at a high level is the number of regulatory obligations you have to comply with depend on how you use a system, and to a lesser extent, there are elements of how a system itself is built. and what risk it poses to those harms, that broad range of harms to people and environment and things, depends on the level of obligations you need to comply with. So that's a high level on the Act. The crux of all of this, I think, is what is AI? We're all sat here talking vastly about AI. What actually is it in the Act? Because I think if you can get your head around it, for me, that's the key to understanding not just the Act itself, but the business risks involved with AI and how that's different to traditional software and products. So I have an extract in front of me, Article 3. An AI system is a machine-based system designed to operate with varying levels of autonomy, may exhibit adaptiveness after deployment, and for explicit or implicit objectives, infers from the input it receives how to generate outputs such as predictions, content recommendations, or decisions that can influence physical or virtual environments. So I hope that's clear. No, so it's a really difficult definition to get your head around, but there is a word in there buried in that meaty, dense definition that's doing all the work and is really important. And the word I want to give a huge shout out to and to champion is the word infers, because that's the difference. That's the key. It's the word infers. It's a system that infers outputs. So what does infers mean? I hear you ask. Well, it's not defined in the regulation. Recital 12 gives us a little bit of a hint. So we hear that a key characteristic is about the ability to infer. The capability refers to processing, the process of obtaining the outputs and deriving models from inputs or data, and the capacity of an AI system to infer transcends basic data processing, enables learning, reasoning, and modeling, which is lovely and sounds fantastic, but doesn't help me as a non-technical person. So I turn to business and industry, and a wonderful engineer called Jeffrey Erickson at Oracle has a fantastic definition, which is AI inference is when an AI model that has been trained to see patterns in curated data sets begins to recognize those patterns in data it has never seen before. That for me is a light bulb moment, because that's the difference. These systems have been built and trained on data that has been gathered, scraped, collected, curated at vast environmental cost, human cost. Thousands, millions of people label and tag this data, but that's the data that is then informing the outputs from the end user. So it's different to a normal system where you would input all your data into a GRM system and then the machine would apply some rules. Now the outputs are coming from other data that you've not seen, isn't from you, and you've not got oversight of. And I think once you appreciate that about the AI supply chain, that's where applying the Act to your systems, but also applying basic risk management in a business context starts to take hold. That's a very long description, so I'm going to stop talking and let other people come in. But that for me is the key. AI is about where you get an output from data that isn't just what you put into it.
Yeah, I think this is great. One of the takeaway for me from this is really there are two aspects of it. One is the product safety, and the second part of it is the fundamental rights that we want to protect for, at least for EU AI Act, for the EU residents, right? And this is great to know. And I know you talked about risk. I'm curious, Punit, to hear from you if you want to dive a little bit deeper into what's the risk, what's the classification of risk when we think about the EU AI Act.
Okay, at a broad level, risk is a very varying topic, but from a product perspective or AI system perspective, combining it with the fundamental rights risk, what we look at is four categories of risk. So, one is when an AI system does not pose or pose a very limited set of risk to individuals and freedom of individuals. So, let's say a transcription service, for example, then we would say that's a low or medium risk and it does not have an obligation. Now, I don't say transcription service is going to be rated as that. I'm just saying, for example, then there are no obligations. But then, as soon as you say there's an Alexa and she can interpret something on your behalf. And now you see, I already said she while it's a technology. So I'm already starting to infer AI as human beings. And that's where it can create some risk. And there we say there are transparency obligations. So limited risk, and we can create transparency obligation, meaning explaining to people what is it, what does it do, and keeping a responsible check. But then we get into some major risk or high risk systems. Let's say we are going to do some scanning of your voice and make a judgment, are you having cold or not? Then make a recommendation to you saying, hey, you're sounding not okay. Is everything okay? Do you want some me to order medicines for you? Now that's a risk, because if I'm doing it in context of my voice, I don't know what context it will interpret. In those cases, you have major requirements. For example, the data governance testing, penetration testing, quality checks, ability to log everything, maintain the logs, technical documentation, even the risk management practice, and also conformity assessment and conformity check, and even a registration with authorities. So that's a long list of requirements, to say the least. But then we also get into high risk, which can impact the society at large or create make decisions for the country on that level. So those are completely forbidden systems, so those are not allowed. But if you look at it in terms of 80-20 rule, I think 80% of your current systems would fall into the category of limited or no obligations, and maybe 20% would have the full application. That's my judgment of current systems, so not the future. And it's just a judgment. And then maybe 1% or 2% of systems would fall into the prohibitive category. So that's how we are looking at risk, and it's still being evaluated. Still, people are looking to map into which category of systems map where and all. Like recently, I was talking to a healthcare company, and they do AI. So if we apply Caro's definition of AI, it fits in. But they say, oh no, our system is offline, so there's no AI. And it has nothing to do with offline or online. The simple definition is, based on the learnings the system has, does it apply itself to new data and make the judgment? It's the inference aspect of it. So then it gets into the risk category.
True. I think that's an excellent overview. So my takeaway is, again, like you basically talked about four categories of risk, with the prohibitive at the very top, which is probably military systems and things like that. But typically, back to your 80-20 comment, if I am in on the business side of this, if you're crunching data and you're not driving autonomous cars or launching rocket ships for it, and if you're just maybe summarizing call transcripts or other kind of business information, summarizing emails, doing analysis on it, doing sentiment detection, intent detection, things like that, those kind of analysis, what I've heard is that there is a possibility that they may fall in the sort of low risk to moderate, depending on the potential of these things to do harm, right? That's kind of what you're trying to balance as a business person in the room.
Absolutely.
Right. So speaking of risk, I know, Alessandro, you've spent a significant amount of your career in risk management across a wide diversity of industries, and particularly with an emphasis on commodities and other markets. So I'm very curious to hear from your perspective, how do you manage risk in general, and particularly in context of the EU AI Act?
Yes. Yeah. So talking about risk management, we in front something big and huge that is often scaring us. So it's AI, and this is why it's so big that European Union came with this draft of act, and also United Nations, with the UN AI body, decided also to. The nation decided to have a body on AI, and they came at the end of last year with the first draft, which we commented as a global AI association. And I I wrote the part about risk management. So my point of view is that we shouldn't. It's a big challenge. It's something big that can be really a revolution, but we shouldn't forget from where we are coming and what is risk management. That human beings have always been doing risk management. It's about the instinct of survival. We do risk management because we want to survive, and this has been on for millenniums. Okay, is our evolution. But then, if coming closer to us, like 30, 40 years ago, we started putting in place rules or best practice for guidelines for risk management. Became a discipline. And so at the beginning of the year 2000, 2002, the Institute of Risk Management came with their risk management standards. Then in 2009, ISO, the International Standardization Organization, came with this standard framework for implementing risk management, came known as ISO 31000. And so on. COSO is a leader in enterprise risk management, and so on. So, what is the message here? We have frameworks, we have guidelines. We shouldn't forget this. Many people have been worked on these frameworks, and a limited number of organizations are using these approaches to address risk. So my view is that we should use these approaches in terms of in front of also AI. So if I give more content, ISO 31000 put all the process for assessing a risk or addressing a risk. So you start with the risk assessment. You have to do risk identification. After you identify, you have to do the risk analysis. Then you do the risk evaluation. And then when your framework is clear, then you can go to risk treatment. What is my risk response? And then you have all the basis. And I feel we have to do all these steps. And the act that we are talking about goes in this direction, like is a risk-based approach. But then it's still in theory, still gives examples. But then you have to decline, you have to apply in your reality. It can be an NGO, can be a business, and so on. So especially on the risk identification part, we have to be very, very attentive. Where really is where you put the foundations. Is the first step. And risk identification is adapted. Is adapted to the kind of risk. I have done a lot of market risk management in the past. So there you have to study the contracts, come with exposures, understanding how they impact your bottom line. Another case which is even more interesting, probably, and closer to AI is the cyber risk. On cyber risk, one of the main used approach for risk identification is not to understand your systems, how they are connected, your IT system, and so on. It's actually to do white hacking, so to do penetration test. So you pay someone to enter in your systems and try to see if they can be broken. So it's very for me fascinating. And actually it's about something like it's a black box. And so this is why I'm making this example, because then AI is a black box. And we see we put something in the prompt and we get the results. And then we don't know if there is hallucinations and so on. So I don't want to go too much in details, but this is my message. Before we really go and say what is the risk treatment, the risk response, should be avoid, should transfer the risk, or we transfer the risk, we should first of all do a proper risk identification of these new source of risk.
I think that's a very interesting perspective you bring, particularly that AI is a black box. I think you said out loud that's something that I speak to a lot of organizations every week because I'm on the sort of AI solution side of the story, and I think a lot of people on the other side of the Zoom call probably have the same question in their mind. that we are dealing
Yeah,
with.
I don't know if, sorry if interrupting you, if you agree or not is a black box or not. But then you start reading articles from the gurus. The gurus don't make names, big companies, and they try to understand the behavior of AI by prompting. By you prompt in this way or another, they found out that you prompt more aggressively, so the answer is more prudent from the system. It means that nobody's going the machine and checking the neural network. You're trying to go input and output. So all the middle is black box. So this is why I say black box.
True. No, it's very well said. So that brings up another interesting question, and Caro, I'm going to ask that from you and see what your thoughts are. In line with what Alessandro is saying, there is definitely a lot of discomfort or unease with AI. Its black box nature, its potential to hallucinate, induce bias, flat out just really, really convincingly lie. So there's a lot of things that we have heard, and these are like, what are the challenges? What are the real world challenges for businesses who are thinking about using AI from your perspective?
I think, first of all, the idea of it being a black box, what I call the black box mentality, I agree. And I've read a lot of scientific and data science papers where even the people developing these models are struggling to understand quite how some of the parameters and the links are being made. But I think a black box mentality is one of our biggest risks, because you can lift the lid on that box to an extent. So a lot of companies are publishing safety documents. In the case of OpenAI, they publish the safety paper and then release the product anyway. But still, a lot of companies are publishing information on how they work. And this is where I think the AI Act, could actually be really helpful for end users, because whilst you might be subject to obligations, and it's a very product safety based act, it's very much looking at what is the risk of this product or use harming the public. But it does place obligations on providers, the people who provide foundation models, on distributors, on deployers who might be your B2B customers, around transparency, around explainability. And so the Act itself might be really helpful in helping you unpick that supply chain when certifications, if they come in and regulations are being drafted to look at working with certification bodies, maybe a CE mark or an ISO standard. If these things come in, that's going to be super helpful at identifying and looking at certified risks and products where there have been metrologists have actually gone in and looked at how these systems work. So I think the practical challenge is understanding that supply chain as best you can, understanding that at the start of this supply chain is the collection of a huge amount of data, unlawfully, I'd suggest, from a data protection perspective, from a copyright perspective. It's unclear where a lot of this has come from. There are labor rights issues. So the millions of people around the world who are employed to tag, label, sift, vet, check this data. The International Labour Organization is doing a lot of interesting work on this, actually. But there are supply chain issues there around labor rights, the legalities, and of course, issues with the product itself. If AI hallucinates, it's very convincing at telling you it's right. So understanding some of the risks, the safety briefing notes of the products themselves, I think is very important, and understanding all of these things in the workplace and the environment as to how you're using an AI system and when you're using an AI system. So mapping your products, making sure that you have a policy or at least awareness of when your employees are just hammering the annual report into ChatGPT because it's the night before it's due and all your financials have just gone off to San Francisco and OpenAI just because it's too late to draft the report. So being on top of those things, I think, are important. And really, I think overall, my advice would be treat these as you would any other risks. These are supply chain risks. They are product risks, they're legal risks, they're compliance risks, they're communication risks. So break down the chain, look at where you're using this tech, look at the controls that you have, governance, making sure your board's aware. I can talk about some class action lawsuits that are very interesting where boards are being personally liable for this. Look at contracts with vendors. It's hard to get clarity. The Act might help that, but try to talk to your vendors. Try to make sure you've got policies rolled out, that your employees are aware of it. Make sure that staff understand when AI is being used, how it's being used, and treat these things as any other business risk, escalate it, put it on the risk register, make sure that it's been assessed by your risk management framework, make sure people are aware, mitigations are in place, and actions are carried out. And I think those kind of basic risk management tools, if you're brave enough to try to prise the lid on the black box and have a look under the hood, as Ann Cavoukian was just saying, that I think is the way to approach this from a business risk perspective. I realize that's a different way of looking at risk than the risk-based approach in the Act as to which requirements apply. But from a business side, just be brave, ask questions, and use, as Alessandro was saying, your existing risk management tools.
That's a great overview of this. I was thinking while you were talking about this that later today I'll be driving for about 6 hours, out of which probably 4.5 the car is going to drive itself. Just so you know, and that one of the things, the reason I mentioned that specifically is because I'm not sleeping at the wheel, right? Like we are in the United States, at least Tesla is, you have autopilot, you can run it on it, and it's got like billions of miles logged against it. But the risk is 100% there. I'm just not going to be playing Wordle on my phone while it's driving itself. And I am definitely having my hands on the steering. But I think it's a good metaphor for where the businesses need to go. I think these are good capabilities to look at, but you absolutely want a human in the loop. You definitely want to make sure that, you are looking at the source of these training, and the supply chain, as you put it. I've never thought of software from a supply chain perspective. I would have thought of coffee that way. But I totally see your point, very legitimate, of how this data has been aggregated, curated, humanly reviewed, tested. There's probably a lot of concerns in a variety of different areas. Having said that, though, I am aware that there are organizations like Anthropic that has Claude, which they are that have actually gone, far and beyond just publishing papers, and they at least proclaim that they're doing a lot of work in this space to make sure that it is a fair trade AI, if you will. But I'm curious if you have any following comments to that.
I was just going to say there's fascinating research on this, and in terms of the human labor cost, your self-driving car, that data is probably going to people in Madagascar or Brazil or the Philippines to hand label and look at your images. So there is information out there. What I would say, though, on all these points, from bringing us back to the EU AI Act, the Act is clear that it is without prejudice to the Corporate Social Responsibility Directive, the upcoming Platform Workers Directive, which we're expecting, to the GDPR, to the e-commerce directive. How these things will interplay isn't clear, because these are big questions and complex questions. This is very much about fundamental rights of people in the EU, and it's about product safety of how these technologies are used. However, the harms they're talking about are environmental, social. There are many people in these supply chains, and many of the mines producing these precious minerals are in the EU. But how these things will interact with Corporate Social Responsibility Directive, the environment program that the EU is pursuing, isn't clear. So what I would say to organizations is, as you're looking across your supply chain, bear in mind all of your legal and compliance risks, and your reputational risks, and your ESG risks, and your reporting on ESG at the board. So bear this one act it is horizontal, but it's not a silver bullet that's going to solve everything. It's one element of your broader risks, because all those other laws still apply.
Very, very well put. Totally agree with you. Very well put. So that brings us another interesting question, and I'm going to ask Alessandro this because, again, risk management. Alessandro, can you maybe talk about any case studies, any incidents that exemplify some of the challenges that Caro mentioned, and what would have been an alternate way to address them?
Yeah. So, it's kind of, they're not public, so it's, people are keep this kind of confidential. What I can say is like, it's the act is telling, and Punit clarified this as a risk management approach, and there are things high risk, lower risk, and so on. So this is already a guide for companies, because for high risk, for example, is like technology applied to employment management, like CV sorting software, and so on. So this is already clarified as high risk, so has to be very, very careful. So a company can assess this risk and find the risk response, like, okay, I don't want any risk on this, I will not do any CV sorting with artificial intelligence. Fine. So I say the AI Act is complex, but also gives a direction of what we should do in terms of applications. But what I'm seeing, talking with friends, people in the network, my network is especially in the commodity trading business. The application that they're trying to put in place is about business, is about creating value, or if you want to say more value, where I mean financial value, okay, money. So it's a business, but it's not special. It's a business where we have more and more data, like many other business. These movements of commodities are more and more tracked. They are digital. We are collecting, systems are collecting a huge amount of data. So there is a big incentive, a big interest in applying AI. And I mean, like data, like weather, about shipping routes, about commodities moving from one place to another, and so on. It's huge. So, and also a limitation of humans, like humans cannot digest all this data. So a lot of effort is done in applying machine artificial intelligence to this data, and, as we say, infer patterns, find a way to create financial value, see something that other people didn't see. It's like, and then my point is, then it can become, by using it, is a big opportunity, but also is a big risk, because it can be a risk bigger than like going against one of these regulation in the AI Act. Like I say, okay, I want to avoid CV sorting risk with AI. I don't do this. I use HR humans to do CV sorting. Fine. I have the categories, and I will try to follow these in the act. When I apply instead to business intelligence, you can if you do something wrong, can be really costly. Okay, and you can take wrong decisions. I go in this market, I buy this commodity, and then I lose a lot of money. So my point is that, and there, it's you. You don't have an EU Act behind. It's just your company is investing time and money in artificial intelligence. So you should be concerned. As we say, you need checkpoints. When you are getting data out of the AI system, you need to check. Actually, maybe we say, okay, we need less humans, and so we'll need probably humans which are even more trained, because to challenge what AI is getting out after you prompt, or with an API, you put data and you get the answer. To challenge this is difficult. We know everybody with the way you get the answer looks very authoritative. And I give you an example. I tested something on some of these AI platforms. I wanted to see if I could automate the calculation of market risk exposure. It's a crucial risk for commodities. Normally, you use specialized systems to do this. You have to code them. It's all coding and getting the data out, where tells you where you are long, short, whatever commodities, so you can see your risk and take your decisions. I try to see if I can get from the AI. And the first approach was interesting. I was getting some answers, but then you look into the numbers and you do your math, and then it was wrong. So, but to challenge these, you need really knowledge. You need to know all these things that works for every kind of risk that you are approaching. This is true, but it's also for AI risk, and to apply and try to manage source of risk through AI. This is what I was doing. I was trying to manage market risk, which is very crucial in commodity business, through AI. And after a while, and after challenging, I was not satisfied. So to close this, what I'm saying is like a business application of AI, which are also not under the radar of the European Union AI Act, can be even more risky and can be even more impacting on the company.
It's interesting you say that, particularly your comment on, I think recruitment is the term you use. So I was reading somewhere that in New York has an act now which prohibits the use of AI for shortlisting candidates, because they found that AI had a bias against women, against people of color, and those are the kind of risks that I think the more this becomes mainstream, and it is definitely becoming mainstream, right? The more it becomes mainstream, the more fuel we pour into this fire. I think some of those risks will come out. Partly they may be teething troubles that happen with every new technology, right? Cars crashed, planes crashed before they became fairly well regulated and safe. But I think part of it is also that it is just, based on the data it was fed, that data represents, unfortunately, the state of the society, right? The internet represents maybe a sorry state of our society, but it does. And it it is unfortunately baked in those bias and those kind of proclivities that we are not proud of, and we won't say unless we are an anonymous person lurking on the internet. There is an interesting question here that I'm going to pose and see if one of you wants to take it. And the question that someone is asking is, what do you think about the very long period of enforcement requirements for high risk system, considering the speed of AI development? And like, as a technologist, I totally appreciate this question because the tech is moving so fast. Literally every 2 to 4 weeks, there is a new AI model, there is new development, there are retrieval augmented generated systems or RAG systems. There is just an incredible amount. Trillions of dollars now are chasing these innovations, right? So this is happening at a very, very fast pace. How do you see the enforcement and the governance and regulatory bodies catching up to it? Anyone who wants
Maybe
to?
I'll start, but I'm sure Caro would definitely add something. I think when we were young, there used to be some placards on the road: speed thrills, but it kills. So it's about mitigating the risks and it's about identifying if you want to take that risk. And it's the same thing with AI or any technology. The technology does thrill, and we say we can bring in a tremendous advantage or something or the other, but you also have to weigh in the risk it can cause on the other end. So you have to look at both the benefit and the risk and balance out the two. And in balancing out the two, yes, you may feel that the speed is being slowed down or you're feeling bogged down. And also, I see the fear of missing out, that is, my technology would be outdated because I'm serving in a regulated region. But even in an unregulated region, if you dish out that technology which is going to create risk, I think it's a short term game you are playing. So if you look at the long term, then I think you want to mitigate the risk and look for the quality rather than the speed.
I do want to clarify though before Karo you respond. So the question really is that technology is moving at a much faster pace than regulations. And in the last, I think, 20, 30 years, this has become far more commonplace just with the advent of internet, cloud computing, mobile technologies, AI, all of that stuff, right? And the question is, how do you, like, would these regulations be outdated, right? Because what you're coming up is not keeping parity with the rate of acceleration of technology. So it's a very fascinating question. And I'm curious, Caro, if you have a perspective on it.
course I do. I have perspectives on most things. I'm always talking. So when I said at the start that this is, as legislation, this is fundamental rights and internal market, but it's also product safety. And we've shifted our language now from talking about fair AI to ethical AI to safe AI. So it's gone from be fair to everyone to do the right thing to just don't kill us all. That's really important, that shift in language. I know I'm obsessing about definitions, but it means that product safety is the legal approach that's being taken. And so ISO, IEC, and their joint technical committees, national standards bodies around the world are coming together to try to develop standards for AI systems. And I was at the Alan Turing Institute just the other week, where several standards bodies are trying to work out how you can test and manage and look at how these systems actually work. Are they working correctly? How are they functioning? And so I think those people who are metrologists, who are market surveillance, who are good at conformity assessments, which is one of the requirements for high risk AI, those people are working, our technologists are working on ways to assess and manage this. And those standards will emerge from international standards bodies. They'll also emerge in part under regulations underneath the Act. So you have the Act, and then you've got regulations, technical enabling implementing measures underneath. Those regulations will have more technical detail. They are easier to change. They're easier to update. They're a bit more agile. And the Act itself says it's without prejudice to international standards and international certification standards. So my guess would be that this will shift from a fundamental rights battleground, if you like, to talking about, is this right, is this fair? It will become a more technically regulated space by product safety, market surveillance, metrologists, specialists. And I've met a lot of the people working on the regulations coming from the UN and the resolution, who are working on regs into the AI Act. Try saying that quickly. They're brilliant people. They are technical people. They have a different perspective on compliance and law than, say, fundamental rights lawyers do, or even technology lawyers do. But I think they're the ones who are going to be setting new standards, new benchmarks, and they will be continually updated, and they will be adopted, I think, either under enabling regulations or will become the standard. So a bit like with the GDPR, technical organizational measures taking account of the state of the art and resources, that lovely blanket term that says you do what is best practice and is appropriate right now. I think that's the approach we're going to get. But with AI, it might be slightly more technical in terms of the standards for how you measure these models. That's beyond my expertise, but the people, I've met some of the people building them, and they really are very brilliant. So I think that's how it's going to progress. The standards will be behind, but only hopefully a tiny bit behind the law, the actual tech itself.
That's very insightful. I really like how you phrased it, and I do see, the economic imperative, because as much as we want to talk about fairness and rights and ethics and all of that, when you're looking at the quarter by quarter and profitability, businesses tend to have different perspectives. And I think the fact that it becomes some sort of a product guideline or a product safety related measure brings a whole different degree of scrutiny and degree of enforcement around it. I can see how it may be the way to wield the the EU AI stick, if you will, and make sure that there is enough alignment across the board and organizations are held accountable to make sure it is a safe and appropriate usage of these technologies. So very well put. I know we are almost coming to the close, so I wanted to give all of us an opportunity to maybe make one specific recommendation for companies that are starting their AI initiative. And I think I'm going to start with Punit, because Punit, you've been through two sessions today, so I want to make sure I give you the first opportunity to go ahead and summarize what would be your one recommendation for companies that are just getting ready to start their AI initiatives.
Thanks, Saurabh. I think one recommendation would be challenging, but if I have to bundle everything in, start by knowing where the end is. Because you typically say, this is the EUAI Act, this is what I want to do. Or maybe you want to say, I want to follow the AI for Humanity standard from the UN or whatever. Start with an end in mind. Do not start like, okay, I have to comply with EUAI Act. Start with, what do I want to achieve in the long term with my AI vision? What kind of a company do I want to be? What are my goals? What kind of systems I'm going to build in? And then work backwards on where does the EUAI Act or any other act fit in, and take a holistic approach. Because as Caro said, EUAI Act is not a silver bullet. You will need to look at a broader solution. This is one element which looks at different dimensions, but there are other things. So look at the end game and build a game plan for that. And one of the things to do that is start to understand what this EUA Act is about, and then you'll be better able to infer what's in it for you.
That's a great recommendation. So begin with the end in mind. Perfect. Alessandro, I'm going to ask you second, and then we'll come to Caro.
Yeah, I have to be consistent with what I said before. So, and risk management. We are talking about lawyers, IT people, obviously very involved, compliance, HR. My advice is not to leave behind the risk management. The risk management and people, they do risk management. So it's I say that there is a discipline behind, there is knowledge, there is know-how. So companies, some often they do things in a rush, late, and so on. We said this before. Involve risk management from the beginning. This is a very risk-based strategy. Should be. In other cases, new things coming, and risk management has been left apart. We saw this on climate risk and sustainability, ESG. If you talk with many people, they think that the risk management people were left behind. They thought there was no risk there, or I don't know, or they were not the right people because they were not technical. They couldn't calculate scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, gas emissions, and so on. So it's technical, and then the risk management people were left behind. So I would say they should be involved from the beginning in the strategy of each company, and also not companies, the organizations, in approaching the AI from a very strategical and structured approach to the matter.
Great, very well put. So don't leave risk management behind, right?
Yeah.
Excellent.
No.
All right, Caro, last but not the least, very curious to see what you would say.
I think my overall take would be, for companies looking at using AI in particular, don't be scared, but don't be stupid. So don't be scared of AI. It's incredible technology. The things that I have seen, I saw a human heart replica being made the other week. It's incredible. Don't be scared of AI, but also don't be stupid. Involve, as Alessandro said, the risk management team. As Punit says, look at what the Act says. Where do you fall? Are you a deployer, a provider? Where are you at? What are your obligations? And try to lift the lid on the black box. So try to understand what this thing is and how it works and where the supply chain is, even at a high level. There's usually a lot of information out there. If you can understand where your risks are, then do exactly what Alessandro says. Get your risk management tools in place, map them, identify them, map them, understand them, manage them, but think about it in terms of risk, but do think about it. So don't be scared, but don't be stupid either. That's my advice.
Well put, well put. I'm going to add a little bit of my spin to everything I've heard. And like I mentioned, I come from the other side of this story, right? I am working day in, day out with companies that are actually for implementing AI. And the thing that I've found is that very much in line with what all of you're saying is, most decisions in life that we make are not perfect. They're not based on 100% knowledge, right? It's always a balance. So I think it boils down to that idea of, don't be scared, but don't be stupid, right? You have to find that balance, seek that balance of where can you apply AI with minimal risk exposure? How do you balance this and find some, a reasonable degree of value at your business? And when you find that, low risk, sort of high return kind of quadrant, then you have some use cases which are good to do it. And in that balance, like everything else, right, risk is always about balance, right? It's the eye of the beholder. Like beauty, right? So the idea is find the balance. When you think about deploying AI as a business, find the balance between risk, between business advantage, competitive advantage, technology led innovation, things like that. So, but very fascinating discussion, and I know we are right at time. I'm going to turn it over to Punit, our excellent host. And before I do, thank you so much, Caro and Alessandro. I learned a significant amount from both of you today, and definitely have a much broader perspective than what I had about an hour ago. So I appreciate all your insights. And likewise, Punit, thank you so much for having me on this. It has been a privilege. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Caro, Alessandro, and Saurabh. I think what Saurabh said is applicable to me, and I think to every one of us and every one of our listeners. We have gained tremendous amount of wisdom and insights into what we knew about EUA Act about an hour and a half ago and now. And that is what the purpose of these kind of sessions is. And I'm very happy that we had you all and also the previous panel to enlighten us. So, with that, I would say thank you so much and have a good day, because some of you have a morning. So, I won't say good evening, but have a very good day and see you soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you. It was very interesting. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.
Thank you.